Right. The um, the story of David and Bathsheba is a fairly well-known one. It's one that I know that lots of preachers do lots of sermons on. Um, but here's my take. Um, it's I mean, if you haven't heard the story, if you don't know the story, then that's great. This will be news to you. I won't have to be compared to somebody else. Anyway, it's an extremely tragic story, um, but there's a lot that we can learn uh, from what happened in this story, especially in regards to how David reconciled himself to God. Um, Now, at the beginning of the story is in 2 Samuel, chapters 11 and 12, and the the story picks up with David, um, his army going off to war, going to battle. They were off to go take a city, basically, and David sent his army ahead, his army commander, but he didn't go. Um, if you look in 2 Samuel, chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem." Now the key thing here to note is that David wasn't where he was supposed to be. This is his first mistake. The very first beginning of this verse says a time when kings go out to battle. Kings, David was the king. He was supposed to go with them to battle, but he didn't. He stayed in Jerusalem. So David didn't go where he was supposed to go, and that's often when that's one of the many doors through which sin can enter, is when we are in a place where we're not supposed to be, or we're not in a place where we are supposed to be. Sometimes you say, oh, maybe it's okay, maybe it's not. If you have to wonder whether you should be somewhere or not, from a moral standpoint anyway, there may be a good chance that God wouldn't be pleased with you being there. And our whole motivation should be to please God. And when we go places we shouldn't go, or in this case, don't go places we should, we're more likely to find ourselves in sin than we intend to be in. So David staying behind when as it says all of Israel went to battle, he got into some trouble. He went outside, went for a walk, and he saw a woman bathing, and he liked what he saw, as I imagine any man probably would if he saw a woman bathing. I guess, maybe, depending on how she looks. I guess she looked good. But he, instead of just looking away, I guess, averting his eyes, as any gentleman probably should, he went after her. And he had his servants go get her. They brought her to him, and he slept with her. And so she came back to him, told her she was pregnant with his child, and when that happened, David just dug his hole even deeper, because instead of just saying, you know what, I've messed up, he tried to cover it up, what he had done. Now he knew that when Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, came back from battle, because he was with the men who were fighting this battle for David, that Uriah would certainly not be pleased with this. So David, in an attempt to cover up what he had done, called Uriah home from the battlefield and tried to get him to sleep with his wife. But David, I guess, didn't count on Uriah's loyalty to his fellow soldiers, and he refused to go sleep with his wife. He said, "How can I go and sleep with my wife when my fellow soldiers are sleeping in tents far away from their wives?" And so he didn't. 2 nights in a row, David tried to get him to sleep with his wife. One of those nights, the second night, he even tried to get him drunk in order to get him to do it, but he still wouldn't do it. So when that didn't work, David decided to use his power as king to have Uriah killed. So he sent a letter back to Joab, the commander of the army, and told Joab to put Uriah on the front lines so he would be killed, and he was. And I think the most heinous part of this part of the story is the fact that David sent a letter. He sent this instruction in a letter to his army commander, to Joab. And the really messed up part about this is the fact that David sent that letter that said, "Kill Uriah," with Uriah. So Uriah was basically carrying the order of his execution, basically, back to Joab. So God was not happy with what David had done. At the end of verse 27 in chapter 11, it says, "The thing that David had done displeased the Lord." No having to wonder what that means. God was not happy about this. And so God sends Nathan, the prophet, to confront David with what he had done. And he tells David a story of how he tells a story of a rich man and a poor man. And the rich man had many sheep, and a poor man had only one little lamb. Now the rich man had received a guest to his house, but instead of killing one of his own sheep for the meal, he stole and killed the poor man's little lamb, his one little lamb that he had, and he used that for his meal. And this when David heard this, from what Nathan was telling him this story, when David heard this, he was furious. He was outraged by this horrible injustice and demanded that this rich man be punished for what he had done. And to this, Nathan responds to David and says, "You're that man. God has given you everything. He's given you 2 kingdoms, many wives, all kinds of wealth, and God said, if that wasn't enough for you, I would have given you more." And I can just imagine how that must have broken David's heart, because David is described in the Bible as a man after God's own heart. And the knowledge that he had done this thing, and God was being so gracious to him. He was saying, look, if everything that I've given you wasn't enough, you could have said so, and I would have given you more. But you just decided to take what wasn't yours. And he had to face the consequences. But I mean, he confessed. As soon as Nathan confronted him with this sin, David confessed his sin. And this is where we get Psalm 51. And if you look up Psalm 51, at the very beginning, it'll tell you that it was written by David after he had been confronted by Nathan about his affair with Bathsheba. And it's a beautiful psalm about David's remorse over what he had done, how he had sinned against God, and asking God's forgiveness for what he had done. And God forgave him immediately, as he always does with everyone when we have a broken heart over our sin. But that didn't change the fact that David still had to deal with the consequences of what he had done. The child that was to be born to Bathsheba ultimately died. And that was the consequence of David's sin, the first and most immediate consequence of David's sin. When we sin, we just have to accept the fact that there are going to be consequences. And they may not be immediate, they may not be even extreme, certainly probably not this extreme, or they may not even seem like that bad, but the consequences will be there when we sin. Ultimately, the biggest consequence when we sin is a broken relationship with God. He cares for us like nobody in the world can, and despite that, we still sin constantly, like the sinners we are. But God is always faithful to forgive. We can hurt God emotionally. I mean, obviously we can't hurt him physically, but we can break his heart because he loves us so much. He loved us enough to take on human form and die so we wouldn't have to suffer the eternal consequences of our sin, that we still have to suffer the earthly consequences. He loves us that much, and when we sin against him, that breaks his heart. That hurts him, that grieves him. And that should be our biggest motivation to avoid temptation and to avoid sin, is the fact that he loves us. And our love for him should make us want to avoid any situation, avoid any temptation, anything that would lead us into sin against him. Because his love for us is never-ending. Even when we sin against him, even when we do bad, even when we are faithless, he is still faithful to us, and he will never stop loving us. But we need, that deserves our love and our devotion to him. And that love and that devotion should drive us to actively avoid temptation and sin. Because, I mean, it's not always going to be easy. Sin has ways of creeping in when we when we don't want it, when we're not looking for it. But that's the thing, we gotta be looking for it. We gotta be on the lookout. We gotta make sure that we are, you know, as I said at the beginning of this, that we don't go places we shouldn't go, or that we do go places that we should be. We shouldn't be where we shouldn't be. Simple as that. And you know, we shouldn't do things that we shouldn't do. The key is to, I've heard this before, and I kind of like it. It's to put up hedges. You say, here's where this sin is. Here's where I'm tempted. I'm not going to go past this point here. Because if I go past this point, I'm likely to be tempted to go further. And if I'm tempted to go further, it's very likely that I will go further. And I need to just say, you know, I'm not going to do that. Like, you know, the most basic example is of an alcoholic who has a, you know, if you're an alcoholic, don't go into a bar. Or if you have a gambling problem, don't go to Vegas. It's simple as that. Don't be going places. Don't set yourself up for a fall. Because we often do that. I heard one story one time. I vaguely remember it, but it kind of stuck with me. Of a story of a little boy who his friends were going to a park, and there was a lake at this park, and his mom said, "Now you don't go swimming in that lake. It's dangerous to go swimming in that lake." Whatever. So the boy said, "Okay." He took his swim trunks with him, and his mom said, "What are you doing taking your swim trunks? I told you you're not supposed to go swimming in the river." And he said, I know you said not to, but I'm taking them just in case I get tempted to do so." And that's kind of what we do sometimes. Like, we know that there's certain things we shouldn't do, but we kind of take ourselves just close enough to kind of get a little taste of it, and then we're like, okay, I'll just get a little taste, and then I'll stop. But that never happens, does it? You step like as close as you think you can, but then you see it, or you get a taste of it, and you're like, whoa, and you want more, and you keep going, and it takes you further than you want to go. So there needs to be lines that you will not cross, even if they seem kind of extreme. Sometimes extreme measures are required. You know, whatever strategy you need to work out to avoid sinning. And that's not to say that you're never going to sin again if you do this. Just saying, it'd probably be less likely. You're less likely to fall into it, because you're actively avoiding it. It's about actively avoiding it. And the thing that should be driving us to that is our love for God. Not necessarily fear or, you know, some dogmatic religious reason. It's not about religion. It's having a relationship with the creator of the universe, who loves you enough to die for you. And it should be a two-way street. He loves you. You gotta love him. And that's, I guess, basically all I've got to say about that.